Hello all, it's Professor K here and I am moving along in our rhetorical act and I am on chapter 11, Understanding Evaluation. And this chapter is important for many reasons, but for one, we are going to be evaluating rhetorical acts as our final project for this class. And so it's important to know the different types of standards for evaluation. So the first standard of evaluation that the book discusses is the artistic standard. So when you think about why we like things, why we like certain movies or commercials or speeches, oftentimes it's because they're beautiful, they're poetic, they're attractive. So the artistic standard thinks about aesthetics, which is pertaining to our sense of perception. How does it sound to us? Is it pleasing to the ear? Is it beautiful? Is it catchy, eye-catching? So like commercials can be very artistic sometimes because they're eye-catching and they're engaging. The other way that we might evaluate is the response standard. The response standard looks at the rhetorical act in terms of its effectiveness and reflects the demand the rhetoric be pragmatic. This evaluation standard assumes that every rhetorical act must communicate, induce participation from an audience, and affect perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes. So the response standard is what is your rhetorical act trying to do, and is it effective in that? If I am giving a speech on a persuasive speech on why you should vote on a certain bill and it doesn't work, you are not you don't want to vote for it, I wasn't effective, right? I didn't persuade you, so that didn't work. So it's hard sometimes to look at effects because we don't have there's a lot of variables, right? So I might not have gone and voted for your specific bill because I can't vote or I forgot to vote. So it's hard to say that, well, I said this to you and it made an effect on you. I used to work for a long time in direct marketing, and in direct marketing, I know what works and what doesn't work because you replied to me. So either you clicked a link or you sent back a form or you called on the phone, that kind of a thing. So I could look at my rhetorical effect and see if I got the response I was looking for. But when we're giving a speech and we're asking people to become engaged with us, it's oftentimes to know what works and what doesn't work. The accuracy standard. So in this evaluation standard, we're looking at the similarity between the reality presented in a rhetorical act and reality as presented in other sources. So we're thinking about truth with a lowercase t. So if we are looking to make good decisions based on the messages that were being sent, we're thinking about rhetoric as a problem-solving tool, right? So if I am thinking about decision-making, social decision-making, and I read something on Facebook or Twitter that's trying to convince me to do something, is that real? Is it the truth? We often see fake news on these social media sites. And how do we evaluate that, right? We're trying to evaluate for truth. But this standard has its limitations. So rhetoric is problem solving. The truths of rhetoric are social truths. And a social truth means my truth might not be the same as your truth, right? We have lots of folks that do not believe in climate change. And I would say personally, well, it's the truth. There are scientists saying that I feel it myself, it's the truth, but many people say, no, it's not the truth. And that's because most of not some of our truths, but most of our truths are socially constructed. If I believe it to be true, it's true to me. If you don't believe it to be true, it's not true to you. So how do we define that in terms of how do we evaluate it? Another standard to think about is the moral standard of evaluation. So not so much is it true, but is it ethical? So oftentimes rhetoric gets a pretty bad name because people associate it with like puffery or falsification. They're saying like that's just mere rhetoric. It's not real, or it's not. It's just it's like it's it's unethical, I guess is the best way that I can describe it, because rhetoric is really powerful. Language is so powerful. Communication is so powerful that we can convince people to do things just by our words. And is that an ethical thing to do? Is it coming from a good place? There are also special constraints, so pressures or constraint that limits or restricts or regulates the rhetorical act. So one of those things might be competing rhetorical action. So rhetoric doesn't happen in isolation, right? Things are going on all the time at the same time and in competition. So I just had a conversation in one of my classes about the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and what competed with that, or was a result of it, was other hashtags. All lives matter, blue lives matter. So there was competition. These things were happening at the same time, and is that holding back the message of the Black Lives Matters? In some people's minds it did, right? In some people's minds they said, hey, no, that is true, all lives matter, it shouldn't just be about Black lives. And Black Lives Matters people said that's not what this was all about to begin with, but that was a competing rhetorical act. There's also preceding and subsequent events that you may need to understand. So if I didn't know why people were hashtagging Black Lives Matters, then I might be a little confused by it, right? I might say, well, of course Black Lives Matters. Why wouldn't you say that? Of course that's true. But if I didn't know, well, the reason that this came out was because there were these shootings of young Black men that kept happening and keep happening, I might be very confused. And the subsequent events that came after that have been some positive. Some people have become educated. Some people have felt empowered to have their voices be heard about these particular shootings, and they felt empowered to go protest because of this hashtag. So what came before? What comes after? That's also really important to know. Because it could make constraints on people. If I'm unaware of why you're posting this, then why would I follow you? Why would I believe anything that you have to say? The book gets in at the end of this chapter into agency. And agency we could talk about for about 150 years, and I don't want to do that to you. So think about agency as like a motivation to act. A power that resides within us and within our interactions with words, with language, with things. There's a way I like to think about it by this scholar whose name is Bennett, and she calls it's like this thing power. Agency is the thing power, and the thing might be us. So we are agents, right? We have agency. I make decisions for myself. I act upon my own decisions, but my actions then cause other people to act and have reactions to my actions, and I react to their actions, and it becomes like this really interconnected sort of like viral effect. And that's how I like to think about agency. And when we think about it in terms of rhetorical acts, one thing sort of spreads, another thing spreads, another thing spreads, another thing, right? So the Black Lives Matters hashtag spread into other hashtags. And when I tweeted it out, people knew something about me and how I felt about the world, and maybe they identified with that and followed me, or maybe they reacted against me and unfriended me, or whatever the case may be. Agency is sort of the power that resides within us, within our interactions, within things, computers, hashtags, right? So there's power all over us, and we're constantly sort of juggling it and trying to figure out how we react to it. But with rhetoric, our intent is to make a reaction, right? We want people to feel or to do or to act. So it becomes almost a constraint in its own ways, that if people don't react the way that you want them to, then what? Then what happens? They didn't want people to write these hashtag all lives matters. That wasn't the intention, but that happened, right? So then you have to use your agency to counteract that in a way, if that's your intention. So that's basically thinking about evaluation. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me.